So we say that references is one of the most important steps in planning a shot. So you see a lot of animators online with their before and after and their shot breakdown and progression from the reference to the blocking all the way to final animation.
Play the game. You hit a game when it's
Roby! No, why would I get fat? Bread makes you fat.
And so you try it out yourself. You filmed the perfect reference, but somehow your character still feels a little bit stiff, floaty, and then just a bit off. Well, you're not alone in that one. Hi, it's Airi. And today we're going to break down why using references maybe isn't quite landing and how you can make it work. Most beginner animators may think that the issue is not copying the reference enough, but in reality, it's actually more about interpreting and transposing it creatively so it matches your character and the style of animation you're going for. Real life is too complex. Let's say a character gets up from a chair. There is an innumerable amount of adjustments that are happening in here, from the weight shift to the muscle tension, and all the micro delays, the list goes on. And the rigs, at best, mimic the anatomy, the joint placements, the movements, the behavior, but it is not built to have the skin dragging, the muscle jiggle. So it's very hard to recreate a realistic motion just on animation alone, without the help of all of the other departments after us. Shot modeling, shot finaling, groom, CFX, all of these departments working on top of animation is what escalates our work. Reference is a study, not trace work. So reference is not meant to be copied one-to-one. That's mocap. It's something to be observed and analyzed. So animators often start by matching pose to pose in the references. So the arm is over here, the head is tilted this way, but then we're missing the analysis part. Like, what is the intent and what is the physics behind the motion? For example, if it's this character standing up, the COG isn't moving on its own. It's not just floating upwards. It's being driven by the initial movement of the arm that is pushing off on the armrest, which then propels the torso to start to lift up. In addition, and you can see in here how the foot is slowly planting on the ground and having that expansion and spreading of the toes. When that happens, that is also helping in conjunction with the arm to push the COG upward into a standing position. So a lot of stuff happening in the background. So if you don't understand the cause of the motion, the animation may feel very mechanical. When you are looking at your reference, you can ask yourself questions like, where is the weight placed? What is the leading motion? Which part settles last? And are there any parts that don't move? What makes an animation sing is your ability to balance stillness among the sea of motion. Hey, if you're enjoying this video and you like how I explain these concepts, head over to my website at www.airibeltran.com to book a mentorship session with me and learn more about animation, or if you just want some consultation and learn more about the industry. Back to the video. Take creative control. The fun part of animation is being able to infuse different styles and work with different kinds of characters, different shapes and sizes. So if you have a stylized character or you're working with a cartoony style of animation, you need to be able to translate a real life reference into a CG character by finding the sections that you can exaggerate, such as the line of action, play with the timing, magnify your overshoots, and things like that. So in this example, you'll see that the shape of the mouth is pretty close to the reference previously. And you can take creative control in a way where you can decide to exaggerate how much the face expands by maybe let's open the mouth a little bit more in this section. So something like this. And in addition to that, you can complement that expansion, push the other parts of the face like the eyelids and the eyebrows. And that is a way of pushing and exaggerating the facial expression that isn't quite present in the reference. So, how do we apply these? Try to describe out loud how the motion happens. Here's an example. We are continuing the push. We're slowly straightening that forearm. Now we are on our overstretched position, straight arms. The legs are not quite there yet. We're not quite on top of our weight. The COG still needs to continue moving forward. And now you see that we get our screen right leg to then start to straighten up. The arms are now off the armrest. The COG continues to move forward, and then look at what happens in here. I put my weight over more on that screen right leg to lift up my screen left leg, and then putting my foot down and then shifting my weight over. My COG moves then backward and to the side, putting my weight over that screen left leg. So all of that stuff that we just did is just me describing out loud the different parts of the body when it starts to move, which one is the leading motion, what follows after that, and then just observing the transfer of weight. So that is a really fun practice to do. Practice being able to separate the different regions of movement in the body. Here's another thing that you guys can try out. Try to locate the different micro movements. The principles of animation are everywhere. So the concept of antic, follow through, spacing, all of that can be observed on any object. And so finding these on the reference can help guide you in your breakdowns and your timing. Here's just a very simple and just a very straightforward example of a bouncing ball. You can go frame by frame on a reference and then start analyzing from there. When the ball starts to go down, it's supposed to make contact with the ground, squash, and then go up and stretch. But what happens in here is we're not really quite seeing that. So if you're struggling on locating these principles of animation, maybe your reference is either too pixelated, the movement is happening too fast, or it's too small on the screen. In this example, that is what's happening. We are actually missing the ground contact. So what can you do in this kind of situation? Try using the slow-mo feature in your camera or your phone. Using this technique is going to enable you to magnify all of the nuances, the texture or animation. So they exist all around us, but our eyes are not quite fast enough to catch up and see everything. So if you have a high-speed camera that can take up to 70,000 or 100,000 frames per second, and you try it out on any object, you can see all of the stuff that we've mentioned before. So this video is an impact on a golf ball, and it's being recorded with 100,000 frames per second. So we all know that a golf ball is a solid object, but now that I'm going to play through in here, you can see what happens when it starts to make contact. And you see that deformation that is starting to happen on the golf ball just on this frame. There is a squeezing happening on the golf ball that you wouldn't think that is possible on a solid object. And as we continue to move forward, we have a little bit more of that stretching that's happening. And then it bounces back into its original form. Another thing you can try is adjusting to the style. So if your character design is very stylized or your animation choice is something that is very cartoony, modify so that these are reflected. So for example, on your line of action, is there any more room for you to push it or exaggerated. The same thing with timing. If you're animating something snappy, don't count the frames on your reference. Adjust this on your character to fit the style. Check your overshoots and maybe extend the amount of frames that you're applying to the character. Basically, understand when to take over, when to push the silhouette, and when to go for a bigger breakdown or a wider stretch. Here's a really fun shot that I got to work on in a show called WondLa.
Let me. I'm going to harness the source's power.
Now let's have a look at the reference.
Let me. I'm going to harness.
Notice that there are several different takes that I did. Each of them are doing slightly different mannerisms than the other. Some have a lot more movements, some are a little bit more still. You can kind of see what I took from the reference and what I added on to the character. For the character's timing turning around, pretty close to my reference. And some of the stuff that I added on top that is not part of my reference is after I turn around, I added an extra shift on the COG where it moves forward so I can lift the character's screen left leg over here and shift my weight to screen left. It didn't happen in my reference, but this is something that I added onto the character. So if I frame by frame through here, you'll notice that the timing of the brows and the eyes are different. I didn't take that from my reference. So the character's eyes are going to flare first, and then the eyebrows are going to come following up. And that kind of serves as an overshoot as it starts to go back down again. And one cool thing I added in here is also that little bit of head shake, just to give some texture. So lastly, keep on practicing. Analysis improves over time and experience. Remember that it's not copy-pasting reality, but making the audience feel that what they're seeing is believable. So if this video helped you, hit like and subscribe, and let me know what other topics you want to hear about. This is Airi, and thanks for watching.